Hi everyone. So today we meet to celebrate World Mental Health Day and the work of Protsahan and how they have actually made a difference in lives of many. And we do it by talking about trauma informed care. So hmm, while I start talking about trauma informed care, I want to share about my journey with Protsahan. So I remember this one time I had to go to the community and go work with a girl. We can call her Sneha. It's a pseudonym. And Sneha, I got to know that she is being abused, and there was no context. Context नहीं था कि किस क्या reason है abuse का. But this child was not able to perform well in the school and the classes, and she was affected, and the social workers could see it. वो काफी परेशान थी और social workers को ये दिख रहा था. Given that I had a session, I used play therapy to understand what might be going on. We sat and we just started talking about emotions. I gave her a clay. I said, "How about you make yourself? You make a picture of yourself." She made a picture of herself. Said, "Where do you feel happy in your body?" Said, "Oh, in my cheeks." "Where do you feel sadness?" "In my stomach, in my hands." "Where do you feel embarrassment?" So stuff like that. So these emotions were, and I asked her, "Where do you feel pain?" And she pointed to her private part. We can call it vagina, and that was something that was. I stayed with that. I understand what might be happening with this child as she's pointing out, and we stayed. We understood what might be happening. Asked her who is the person who's causing this pain. She drew this person, and what I did, I this person used to walk using a bishak, a stick, and I, for example, drew the stick on the right side. And she said, "No, no, no, the stick was on the left side," and she corrected me. And so in that moment, I was just thinking what it meant for this child to have the stick on one side and not the other. How significant it was for her to map who was doing it to her. And then the kind of feeling that she had, that what would happen, that I don't have parents, who will take care of me? Would I be taken away from my family? So while there are so many emotional, social, and also legal things engaged, the psyche of the child and the harm it does is usually neglected. How it would impact a child to see that the very imagination of what sexuality looks like starts from abuse, and what kind of trauma that would create for this child. Mm. So I think it's very important. All of these things are shrugged in, shrugged off and not talked about, because why should we talk about the difficult parts or the negative things in this society? But while I think it is important to talk about them, and for some reason in the last 1 week, all the patient or people that I work with have also been bringing stories of abuse. And who are the kids who are vulnerable? The marginalized kids, the children like us. I don't know if any of us have any stories where we don't feel we have been abused or harassed as women. So I think it's very essential to have that dialogue, what trauma looks like, and it speaks up in every space, in corporates, in our space, in marginalized space. But there is a concept of the intensification or the multifold of trauma. If someone has a caste concern, someone is coming from a not so privileged space, right? If there's caste marginalization, there's gender marginalization, then it adds on. I would like to invite you all and talk about, how this multifold, the intersectionality of gender, caste, and class has an impact. Lana, would you like to add on, or Subhi? Whoever feels like taking the lead, please go ahead.
Um, sure, I can start. So I think, as you said, that sometimes it is a person's home where the trauma is coming from. And for us, and I'm just going to bring in the social work perspective here, but a lot of the responsibility then falls on the social worker to be able to create the space for a secure relationship, because that would be one of the integral parts in the healing journey of a child. And the trauma informed social worker would be able to understand how the trauma is showing up, as opposed to the not trauma informed social worker who would possibly think of this child as lazy or angry or just, I can't work with this child. And then there's so many other things that come into this. As you said, there are so many vulnerable sections of our society where you can expect the trauma is a norm rather than an anomaly, where you know that traumatized people are, and it doesn't matter what their reality is, uh, because I mean, it doesn't matter how much they try. The fact is that there is trauma, and there is even so many different kinds of trauma, whether it is, you know, even developmental. And yet it is not understood because we'll always think of it as that big event, or we'll only consider it under the ACEs, or we'll only consider it like, you know, just something really big has to happen for us to recognize this as trauma. And if it's not happening now, then the trauma should be over. Like we shouldn't have to deal with it now. Now they've come to our NGO and now they should be safe and we don't have to cope. Like we don't have to deal with the trauma. Now we can just focus on improving like the child's life. And so I think, and there are a lot of things that even within our spaces, because ultimately kids are growing up with parents who have certain opinions about other people from different castes and different religions and different color of skin, um, who've had different experiences. And as much as we try, the kids are still going to have those interactions with each other, even in a so-called safe space. So I think that makes it even more important for us, like for social workers, for teachers, for everybody who works with any vulnerable population, to have that knowledge. And it doesn't have to be like, I understand neurobiology and I can like tell you every part of the brain, but just understanding that this is what happens. And it doesn't have to be this part is linked to that part, but just like, this is what is impacted. I think those conversations, those little bits of knowledge are should be should be a part of all of our, and I mean, yes, definitely social workers, teachers, everybody who works with vulnerable populations. Um, and just one more thing I want to add here is, a lot of us go into social work, or a lot of us create NGOs, and a lot of us do a lot of things with our own savior complex. And I think that is also something that we should think about, just putting that out there. But yeah, thank you.
What you said makes complete sense, the type of traumas, how home can be the space of trauma, especially the last point you added, it's the survivor savior complex, and it it is also the wish to be omnipresent and omnipotent, to be always there and to be able to help, and which leads to the burnout, and to understand that you can't be all that, and you have to take care of yourself. While I say that, why not you also introduce yourself, Surbi, and do that as well.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to do that. So, Subuhi, work as a trauma and resilience coach, also heading CSR for a company called Loham. I have a master's in psychiatric social work and a master's in development, and I've also studied trauma. And absolutely, this is the point I wanted to get to, is that compassion fatigue, our burnout, all of these things are so real. And then there's the additional factor that if you've come into social work, or if you've come into helping someone from society, then you should expect, uh, first of all, to not be paid or not be treated very well. Those should be your expectations, which I think is a big problem as well. But yes, thank you.
I'd like to jump in on what Subuhi mentioned around the savior complex. So I'm Lana Jenjelev. I'm with the Neurodiversity Foundation, and I've been supporting organizations and teams in terms of how they can create more healing-centered ecosystems. I'm a hope facilitator, so healthy outcomes from positive experiences. And a big part of why I'm engaging more on healing centered approaches is the realization that given that trauma is a very complex um, experience, so it's not just a one time experience like what Subuhi mentioned, but it is really a systemic experience as well. So it's not just the family that's the person affected, but the family and the other systems involved are also affected, especially on a on a cultural level as well. um and this is the saviorship complex is something that I've also been advocating, to move away from saviorship to actually look at our roles as stewards, understanding that there are these experiences of historically marginalized communities, vulnerable populations. All of this have a role also in our history, in the ways that in which society has created certain, I would say, mechanisms to keep us from thinking of ourselves as low. I don't know how it is with within your situation, but in the Philippines where I grew up, we've been so historically marginalized, colonized for more than 333 years by the Spanish and more with the Americans, and those experiences have really created a mindset around how we approach pain and challenges, and how we even phrase it as, oh, like what you've mentioned, Subuhi. This has happened and then it's done. Like we do not even talk about it. We do not even address it because we were told to just either keep it quiet or you just move from it. You do not think about it anymore. So there's the complexity of abuse is really also looking at the history and the cultural influences. So we cannot just easily unpack it as an individual or a family experience, but rather it is a community and a cultural experience as well. And this is why, in looking at how we can support the helpers, for me, one of the things that I've been trying to advocate more is that understanding of, yes, hurt people, um, but settle bodies. So when we are as individuals capable of understanding how we can regulate ourselves, how we can resource ourselves, how we can find ways in which we can tap into co-regulation. So all these practices can help support us in our work as helpers, in our work as social workers, in our work as change makers, mainly because if we look at, again, this paradigm of change, or being someone who would like to influence change, when it's really coming from a mindset of saviorship, the tendency would be there would be power over mechanisms that happen in whatever policies, whatever practices, whatever new activities or programs that you would bring in. When you look at it from a level of stewardship, wherein we see it as the person, no matter what the circumstances is, has capabilities, has strengths, and have the wisdom to navigate the situation, then what we're trying to do is support that person, rather than seeing ourselves as the one that has the answers for the person. So thank you for bringing that up, Subuhi, around the importance of shifting mindset around saviorship.
Lana, when you were speaking, all I could think about is a building block. How blocks are being built one after another, and how that social worker might be putting it, and how now the image has to change from building the block and social worker putting it to that they're capable of building the block on their own, and all you have to do is support and be there and nurture. like as you said, hope, bring in that kind of strength, and not just say, oh, you have to, I will put the blocks for you. That also is very empowering. And I think this is something that Protsahan does work with, the choice, giving that choice, having that empowering voice, and empowering in a way that you're not taking agency from the other. I think what you spoke really aligned with that. And while I would also like to introduce myself, which I forgot as well. So I'm Prakriti. I am a child and adolescent registered rehabilitation with Rehabilitation Council of India, and I've been working in the field of mental health for a decade now. I have worked in communities, and currently I'm also doing working with groups in various forms, and I have my private practice in Delhi, where I work with children, with adults and adolescents as well, and with families. I think it's very important what you also pointed to, Lana, that how community as a whole has to be looked at, how the historical context has to be looked at, not just as an individual. It's like a tree. Everything has to be looked at, even at the roots, the trunks, and everything has to be looked at. Not just one particular leaf or flower can be looked at and said that, oh, this flower is problematic because it's not able to grow. Thanks for bringing that in, Lana. I would invite Harshita. Do you want to add something, contribute, and please do introduce yourself.
Hi, firstly, I'm very sorry for the ins and outs. I've been having some unexpected and unfortunate internet connectivity difficulties. So, hi, I'm Harshita, and I'm also a therapist. So, I'm a psychologist, and I practice something called narrative therapy. So, I'm a narrative practitioner, and which looks at problems, or which looks at any kind of human problems from a systemic and an intersectional perspective. So it sort of takes a step back, and it says the person is not the problem is the problem. And if the problem is social, then the response also has to be social. And to me, I think that one of the biggest kind of shifts in my mind was I was always interested in how, because, even having seen it kind of growing up with family, with, like just in around me, how trauma was so much because of gender and patriarchy, kind of seeing, like, I think even when you see within your family, sometimes how women are treated, and, you grow up seeing the effects of that treatment, very, very up close. And I think that sometimes becomes your first introduction to how unfairness or injustice causes mental health difficulties. And I think then, as I did more and more with narrative practices, I became interested in seeing how there are all of these systemic influences that affect someone from within. Literally, your brain and your body are so adaptive and responsive. And I think that's because all of us are social creatures, right? Like, and what does that mean? That means that we have a nervous system, and we have a brain, and we have all of our sensory organs that are very receptive to the outside world. So they're responding, you touch something and you feel good or bad, or you feel icky. Similarly, like every interaction that you have with your environment is going to evoke some kind of a response. When you have that over a period of time, that's going to be something that either is a detriment, or it is something that affirms your growth, right? And I think this is especially true with children, and that's where development and neurobiology become really important. That there's a critical window, of development for a lot of us mammals, especially. So when we're growing up, and this is not to say that change doesn't happen throughout our lifetimes, right? Like with neuroplasticity and research around how interventions can be helpful, we know that it's not like a death sentence. We know it's not a full stop. But children are more precious in terms of the fact that the agency that they might occupy in society, because of a bunch of reasons, is different from what adults occupy, whether it's self-advocacy, whether it's how seriously their voices are taken, whether it's the risk of safety that exists with children. Like, there is a need for protection from a psychological perspective, an ecological perspective, a systemic perspective. And so it then becomes the jobs of the adults, who, of course, all of us were once children, and and different, of course, experiences, different demographics, etc., etc. But I think we can all empathize with the fact that we have to speak the child's language and know the child's needs in order to respond, and this has to be holistic. Like it can't be, singular. It can't be, I'm just going to work on education and I'm just going to teach them self-care skills, or I'm just going to, try and work with social emotional learning, or I'm just going to give them extracurriculars. So, how can our response to systemic and ongoing intergenerational childhood trauma be holistic? I guess that's the question that I'd love to bring here.
Thanks for that, Harshita. And it almost, it actually talks about this, that how I was just, when you were speaking, I was imagining how child is supposed to or expected to shed off all their identity the moment they enter a school. That, okay, you're just a student. You don't come from a marginalized background. This gender does not impact you. The caste doesn't impact you. Your class doesn't impact you. Poverty, nothing should be taken in school. And that is such a reductionist way of looking at a child, because we all
हाँ,
have that.
जैसे कहीं से नहीं आए, मतलब हम बस बस पौधे की तरह कहीं पे उग गए. पौधों को भी, plants also need the right kind of growth, but we're not blank slates, definitely.
And how, as a child, there are certain resources that we have, right? There are resources required for our growth, and if that resource is being used for to deal with trauma, it does affect the growth. Right? If I have this many of resources and they are being used for the trauma, if I'm looking at domestic violence, if I am dealing with poverty, if I am dealing with academic issues, with friendships and relationships, then all my resources are being used in that and coping with it. My body is not developing, my mind is struggling. And a lot of trauma is also seen to affect learning disorder. Learning disorders or disabilities can actually become part of a child because it is also can be ignited by the trauma that have gone through. And these are some of the very important conversations that we need to have, I think. While I was also wondering, I was thinking about hope and heart model that Protsahan has. Do you want to add something to that, Lana? That how hope model really, helps with the trauma and over to you.
Yeah, thank you. The what's this? The healthy outcomes from positive experiences has been I would say a field of research for the past more than a decade now. And there is a positive childhood experiences scale that is being used, wherein questions like, as a child, how often did you feel able to talk to your family about feelings? So something that Subuhi has already mentioned a while ago. Feel your family stood by you during difficult times, or enjoy participating in community traditions, or feel a sense of belonging in high school, feel supported by friends, have at least two non-parent adults who took genuine interest in you, and feel safe and protective by an adult in your home. So these are the 7 questions that the Hope research has started with. And uh, one of the things that they've seen in terms of looking at ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, is that when there are children who have more PCEs, or positive childhood experiences, that they've reported. So even though they have adverse childhood experiences, but if, say, for example, they have like 0 to 2 PCEs, so it might be that they've participated in community traditions, or they felt a sense of belonging when they were in school. So those are 2 checks. That's already 51% in their mental health that has increased. If you have like 3 to 5 PCEs as an adult, then it increases your mental health by 75%. And for those who have 6 to 7, then you have 87% good mental health. So when we're talking about resilience, when we're talking about what's this ability to navigate trauma, not just as a child, but also an adult, looking at what's also there is very important. And this is also why in a big part of the advocacy that I do is to look at what's wrong with you. Mainly because our society is so steeped in looking at the problem, what's wrong, that we fail to look at, but there might be other factors that are currently going well. And how can we leverage that? How can we move away from a very pathogenic focus to a salutogenic focus? And the term salutogenesis, to be honest, was like coined in, I think it was in the 1970s by a sociologist. So it's like it has been there, that the term salutogenesis as a way of looking at the wholeness of the individual. And unfortunately, when we're just looking at the trauma, we're just looking at the problem, we're just looking at the experiences that has caused the challenges in the first place. But like what you said, there might be some resources that we're not tapping into. And how can we tap into those resources? How are we able to look at, what can the child in the child situation bring in that can help leverage the strengths, that can help leverage positive connections, engagement, the environment. These are all different areas that we can look at that can activate this supporting mechanisms that are already present in the child's environment.
Absolutely. I think, while you were speaking, two things came to me. One was what are the adverse childhood experiences. I wanted to tell about to others that it is a study which was done in 1980s. Hopefully, I'm correct about the year. That there are 10 questions were given to people and they had to fill. These were adults who filled these questionnaires about have you witnessed any divorce, have poverty, suicide, and these kind of 10 questions that you can find, physical abuse, emotional neglect, socially being deprived. So these were questions based on, and which actually led to understanding that if someone has gone through more ACEs, they have more possibility of getting diseases. Their possibility of getting, if you have 5 ACEs, your possibility of getting cancer increases by 3 or 4%, 4 times. So there is that study that one can read. And I was also thinking how even in our work as therapists, and Harshita might add to it, that when people come to for therapy, they would always bring what is going wrong in their life. And it takes so much time for them to say, okay, these are also things which are going right. As if the right or the positive doesn't have spaces in mental health. It's all one has to be a problem. And I was reading something on group therapy, talked about cure and healing. Cure is mostly about a symptom and healing is about holisticness. And we are so focused as a country, as a world, as a nation, that we have to cure everything. But the healing, where is the healing? And where does one find healing, in a world which is always looking for health? We all are looking for health, the environmental health, the social health, the cultural health, the emotional health. So, what happens in that case? Where is the healing? Which actually very well said, Lana, that the healing actually happens through these positive experiences also. They are so significant. Forget adding them, they are the nutrition to our being.
So I think that thank you, Lana, because you talked about so many different aspects of like post-traumatic growth, and I think that that's once again, I think that that's so vital in remembering that we must not treat trauma, or we must not treat trauma as something that creates deficiency or that creates a permanent. And it's important to talk about its effects, of course, and I'll just get there. But I do think that when we usually talk about the framework, it is so deeply steeped in this kind of unwavering, there's nothing that can be done about it, or it's so awful, or it's so terrible. And I think when we talk about the problem so much, and especially when we go and do that to people that are affected by it in trauma-informed therapy, one of the things that we say is you don't even need to talk about what's happened. You know, you come here and tell me about your upset, or tell me, you know, what principles or what values are violated for you. You know, you try to connect with what was lost for the person and kind of like build on that. Like therapeutically with narrative practices, we often say that if you're trauma informed, you're not going to force the person to relive some of those events therapeutically till they're sort of ready to. And it serves the same purpose, you know, like trauma is also something that takes away a person's sense of dignity a lot of the times. And when we are working in a trauma informed manner, that innate sense of respect for persons, of dignity, becomes so vital. And I think that the other thing that Prakriti is sort of bringing up around ACEs, and what Lana also said, uh, you know, I think that अभी इस देश में ऐसा भी टाइम है कि हम ट्रॉमा रिकग्नाइज ही नहीं करते कि we don't see the presence of trauma as something that is you know, it's actually there, that we don't see the effects of it, that we often see distress as just kind of continuing, especially in children. We are yet to be trained to understand what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. For example, how does a teacher know to spot when something isn't okay? What are the events that could potentially be traumatic that are normalized right now because of the kind of disenfranchisement that exists everywhere, right? If something is normalized, it is normal to the eyes of the society. You kind of stop noticing what's happening. So I think that some of our work right now has to balance out the fact that healing can happen, but we also have to recognize where the traumatic effects lie, right? And I think that we evade that question so much because we're going to have to take systemic responsibility for it. If we say that, you know, you're going to have to look at multiple avenues of the child in order for it to be a trauma informed approach, you're not just going to get away with like tuition classes or digital privacy classes. You're going to have to provide a physically safe space. You're going to have to provide resources such as drinking water and access to a washroom. You're going to have to provide, physical, material, financial, legal. All of these are things that are trauma informed as well. I think that it's scary to say that because we don't want to take responsibility as a society of how our systems promote and cultivate traumatic experiences, right? We're going to have to go back to systems and say, this is not working out. Our education system is not working out. Our psychiatric system is not working out. So I do think that, as psychologists and I think social workers, the systemic approach to trauma is very important. So I think that that's what one of our hopes was. I think as a researcher, I also wanted to bring in both aspects. That there are ACEs, that, that we do want to study adverse childhood experiences, but we also want to see when we operationalize resilience as structural, or when we say resilience can be built. Resilience is not innate. You're not born resilient. Nobody's born resilient, right? Like we practice, we cultivate those skills. So when we're able to operationalize what resilience means, it's not saying that, oh, you have the willpower to bounce back. You're telling a 14-year-old that, that's even more traumatizing, right? So how do we operationalize resilience? Who's responsible for that kind of resilience building when it comes to a child, right? It's the teachers, it is the community, it is safe neighborhoods, it is accessible legal services, it's trauma-informed legal services, right? Like it's going to court and having a child-friendly counselor there who's going to take you to the other room and talk to you when you're overwhelmed. It's being in a psychiatrist's office or gynecologist's office and being briefed by a trusted adult before you go in and get a cervical check or whatever, some kind of a checkup. So our idea was, can we try to without doubt establish that there might be some adverse childhood experiences that are there in our communities, and when we operationalize resilience, are there any kind of effects? So that's actually something that we're kind of trying to study right now, and I hope it goes successfully and to share the results with you. But yeah, those were some of my thoughts right now.
Very well put, Harshita. And I was wondering, that what it means to then hold a system, that strengthens not just an individual but on a systematic level, right? And we'll just pass it on to Surbhi and Subhogi. And what do you want to add to that? That was very impactful what you said.
Yes, I think Lana, Harshita, and Prakriti, everybody has made such amazing points. And I just want to bring like this little thing in, which is when it comes to our procedural memory, which is a memory of an event, we are trained to only look at the bad. So when we talk to someone about what went wrong, or like, what happened, they will only tell us what went wrong. And which is why we have to bring them back to the resources to be able to go anywhere with it, because that is the first thing that they forget. Um, so many of the clients that I've worked with who are adult survivors of different kinds of trauma will always say that, but they did this, but this is what happened. And that's when we have to kind of do that whole co-regulation and even like build the resources and kind of remind them that I'm here to listen to you, but we have to move past the story, because the story is only true it's only real in your head. It's not the whole real, like it's not the actual reality, because reality again is just perception. And then coming back to just understanding what trauma looks like, there are so many of us that have the society at large loves people who are in their sympathetic nervous system because they are overactive, they are overachieving, they are doing things, they look like, okay, yeah, you're studying really hard, you're doing amazing at your job, you keep going, you work like 80, like an like a machine. We forget that even machines need charging. Like your phone is not going to work after a certain point, you have to charge it. We forget that, like when we compare things to machine. And the other thing is, when you have the opposite reaction to stress, which is where you kind of shut down, that is not recognized at all. And as someone who has that response as well, I've so often been told that, okay, then suffer, because you're not in a space of trying to get out, because that doesn't seem even doable. And that, I think that happens with so many of us, where we don't, like, so many of the teachers, social workers, keep coming back to teachers, because we think that, okay, we are working with vulnerable populations, but in a school where you're getting people from privileged backgrounds, you don't need to be trauma informed. Whereas I think trauma informed should be the norm, because you just don't know how to recognize it. And until we know how to recognize it, what are we ever going to do about it? We can't even recognize it in ourselves. What I would really love, and I know this is something because with all the conversations that I've had with Sonal, everything that I've seen of Protsahan's work, what is really beautiful is that there is a movement towards learning and towards like an openness to move forward, to do better for the people that you're serving, and not be stuck with the idea that this is what I know and so this is it. And that is what most of us in our families have. In like, I mean, with growing up in the 90s, 80s and 90s, this is what I've seen. It was that I know our Indian culture is different from every other culture. Our Asian culture is different from every other culture. We are more community centered and we are less individual centered. And so we have no boundaries, and we are allowed to, like, we own our children. We don't, this is like, the beautiful words stewardship is nowhere. We own our children, and therefore we can do whatever we want to them. And I think it's still prevalent today. And it's scary because those are the kids that are now gonna, grow up. And there's someone that I was speaking to, or someone that I was listening to once said that, in our parents' generation, this might have been okay, but now you have so much access to information right on your fingertips. And again, that's a privileged response, because not everybody has that access, but at least whoever does has that access. And then again, it's us recognizing that we are responsible for our future and our well-being, and what's happened happened, and now we have to go past it.
Yeah, I think I was, when you were speaking, I was wondering about narrative therapy and the alternate story building, when we say I am always like this, I never do this. So there is this always is never true. Because there's always, mostly, I would use the word mostly, there is also an alternative way of looking at things, that I never say no, but there is a way that I have said no. And in my practice and through reading, it is usually also the people who find it difficult to hear no that they don't say no. Yes, our parents don't say no because they find it difficult. And one of the things that has always been there, mostly that I've seen in my work, it is the relationships that get affected the most. To wonder that, okay, the world is, we all have this perception, the world is not a great place in some ways, and that perception can be harmful but can still be worked through. But to feel that my house, myself, is not a healthy space, not a space which can be of safety. That's why a lot of children dissociate with their body. अपनी body से अलग हो जाते हैं काफ़ी लोग. They feel that their body is an outsider. Abuse is happening, but it's not really happening to my body. Then it makes me wonder what kind of relationship one would share with health. And a lot of social workers do have concerns with their health, not taking care of their health, burnout, and other things. Because जब शरीर से वो रिश्ता टूट गया है तो कहीं ना कहीं वो अलग अपनापन नहीं महसूस होगा. When the relationship with your body has been detached, in some ways you will not feel that closeness with your body to actually take care of it. And while we talk about this, I was also thinking that can we talk about some good practices that have actually worked and helped in your work? And
I
Harshita,
was
would you like?
also wondering, when you were talking, both Prakriti and Subuhi, about, I think, of course, it's so important to remember that when, like we were saying, that trauma is not within the person, it's in the environment, and, it is something that it's a response, whenever we think about either nervous system dysregulation, or we think about the sympathetic activation, parasympathetic dysregulation. All of those things are responses because our bodies have evolved to try to protect us to the best of its own understanding. And I was just wondering, what you guys were talking about reminded me of neuroplasticity. So when we talk about like best hopes, and when Lana, kind of talks about more salutogenic approaches, or what it's like for positive childhood experiences to also be highlighted, I think that is the response, without making it a silver lining response to say that okay, we can't cure it, right? Like we can't change systems, but what we can do is try to build more depth of scale interventions that allow for these experiences, and that allow for the brain to feel that safety, to experience that safety. And when the brain experiences that safety, you can go about your development as you might have otherwise, right? So I think that there's this kind of a ladder where when a person, a child, is all right, their typical development, the cognition and the social emotional and the the regulatory mechanisms will take up the most space. So we'll have like higher order thinking skills, social emotional exploration, play, regulation. All of those will be the ones that are taking up the biggest part of the pie chart, and survival will actually not take up that much space. And conversely, you flip that around, when there is consistent unsafety, you have no choice, but to survive. So all trauma responses are survival responses. I often say, you show me a bad habit, I'll show you something the person's coping with. So when we think of children as, badly behaved, or, doing this, doing that, that is the child trying to survive. And I think that's a perspective that us as like interventionists, psychologists, practitioners, social workers often need to remember, so we don't look at the child and blame them for trying to survive. So I'm just glad that we're being able to hold that perspective while talking about things that are positive, that are things like neuroplasticity, positive childhood experiences. I think that just speaking about what I have observed with Protsahan in particular, one of the first things that stood out to me was the relaxed spaces that Protsahan has. So they have something like the Girl Empowerment Center. So there's, and they're like within the community themselves. And when you go inside, you'll just find, the girls are chilling, they're talking, they're on their tablets, they're like picking up like art materials, and it becomes this physical symbol of the fact that okay, now I can go from, if I was in fight or flight, or if I'm at home और मेरे को बोल रहा गया है कि ये बर्तन करो या फिर छोटे भाई बहन का ध्यान रखो, I have parentified responsibilities. Here I get to kind of flip that around, that pyramid we were talking about, and I get to just rest, or I get to explore, or I get to play, or I get to while away time, I get to loiter, all of the things that are important for childhood development. So, can we look at that as trauma informed, or is that a useless thing? Is it useless for children to have safe spaces to loiter, or is that really crucial to their development? So, that was one of the first things I noticed, is that there's space to just be for the child, that they're not struggling to take up space, or to ask her what they want, or to pick up a tablet and play, or like make a presentation and listen to music or dance, all of which I've kind of seen happen in Protsahan. And mind you, I also, and please, Charul, I think that you're here, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also a very high degree of vulnerability in communities that Protsahan kind of works with. So from what I understand, like the intersections of vulnerability is that there is migration. So there's first or second generational migration, and the child might have come here during their lifespans or right before they were born. There's also intersections of caste and socioeconomic strata. So there's poverty, and there's also what we call a lot of wage labor, right? So there's unsurety of employment a lot of the times. There can be substance abuse, domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse. So from ranging from economic instability to caste-based violence to gender-based, kind of vulnerabilities, all of these intersections do exist. What we've also seen very explicitly is that the ACEs that we talk about are literally manifesting there, whether it is a death by suicide a lot of the times, where we often think about imitative suicides or copycat suicides, which do happen in some sections of the community where there is a high rate of marginalization. So, for example, I don't want to name the centers to kind of protect the confidentiality, and, I don't want to kind of label one place as this is what happens there, but you will see at least one or two suicides a month, and that can, are we just going to normalize that? Where does that statistic go? The people who work there know it, and it's alarming, but I don't see it in newspapers. I don't see some, I don't see the headlines around this is something that is wild and just not okay. So if you're looking at all of these childhood experiences that are affecting the longevity of the child's life, then there is clearly an urgent need for intervention. Yeah. Sorry, I think we were also talking about best practices.
I think you did mention the best practices,
Yeah.
how
And this is, of course, apart from the heart model, which, yeah, we can get into later.
so how providing a space, loitering. I actually remember Shilpa's case who paper and loitering, why loiter, and how loitering is very important, and girls having that space, that free space where you can just be. And also thinking about the art, how I in my work have used art and to express yourself unconsciously, bringing those parts of yourself that you might also not recognize. And with art doing that, with experiential workshops, with experiential learning where you can actually experience something, nothing is told to you, you can actually get into something and feel it. I think that is quite an important part. And while we are also coming to an end of the session, I would like all of you to just share two lines of what are the best practices according to you, and then we wrap up.
Yeah. I'd just like to share first around that loitering. And this is also something that I'm seeing more in the international scene around now. We're evolving in terms of our awareness around how systems are built. So if we look at our current systems are very mechanistic, very product driven, very, like looking at ourselves as machines. Now the current understanding is let's go back to looking at humans as part of nature. So this life systems worldview is now the current, it's like the field of regenerative learning, regenerative leadership. This is getting the worldview out around we are part of nature. And if we look at nature, like the situation around loitering or taking the time to rest, this is part of our nature cycle. There is a cycle of rest, there is a cycle of creation, there is a cycle of decomposing, right? There is the importance of following, where we just let the land rest and not do anything, do not till it so that it can grow even better. So these are, for me, this is what we're now seeing in terms of as societies evolve, we're catching up in ways in which we've created certain paradigms or perspectives around who we are as humans. And now we're understanding that no, we're not machines. We're not meant to be always on, like what Subuhi mentioned. Like, we're not meant to be always on. And as we shift this paradigm in terms of a life systems view, then we get to ask ourselves in terms of, how do we use our energy? How do we acknowledge rhythms and cycles? How do we understand, the importance of interconnectedness? And in Filipino, we have a saying wherein the pain or the illness of the smallest finger is the pain or the illness of the entire body system. And that for me is one of the one of the precursors of looking at, we are all interconnected, and what pains one pains all of us. And if we are to look at it from a liberatory point of view as well, of like healing can only happen when there is collective or community healing. And we do that together. We do that as a system.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said, being in sync with the nature, and with nature we all grow and heal. And that is one of the very important part, that healing, how. So today's discussion is also part of Hide Dialogue, which is an annual stakeholder initiative that Protsahan takes, to bring different stakeholders together to learn and converse, to try to move the needle in some ways for the children. And it also connects in what you were saying, that these are dialogues that we have between us, are also ways of connecting with our own ecosystem and giving to each other, which is also part of the community and the nature which gives to each other. Nature has a way of being and way of flowing together. So thank you for sharing that, Lana. It really adds to how we can think not just from the perspective of systems and strengthening them from the institutional perspective of is man-made, but also from the perspective of nature. What is already given to us, and how can we incorporate that? So I will just want Surbhi to add few lines and go ahead.
Yeah. I think that working in sustainability and working with in the space of healing, one of the things that I've realized is that I think it's time for us to move a little as far away from patriarchy as we can. It's going to be hard because we haven't seen what matriarchy looks like in a very long time. But I think that's something that we can move towards. Our a lot of colonization and moving towards the Western ideas of education was also aimed at discrediting our let's say ancient practices. And one of those, and now they're coming back. Like one of the most beautiful shamanic healing practices that I've heard of is ask somebody to tell you their life story, whether they're a child or an adult or whatever, and they'll tell you a lot of the things that they've experienced that have been bad. Then ask them to tell you their story again, but ask them to tell you their story as though they are the hero of the story. And suddenly everything changes, because now the adversity, everything that was earlier the problem, becomes something that they step to, you know, accomplish whatever it is that they're doing. And I like to add a fairy tale element to it, just because if you work with kids, then that becomes, just nicer. And there are so many things that we're doing now, where we're going back to the way, the ancient wisdom that we have. And I think it's important for us to do that, not only because of, and of course, there are many things that we have to remove from our practices, but um, understanding that just because something is acceptable right now doesn't mean that that is it. We have to keep our own spaces open for learning. And I think the most important, like, if I have to say one best practice for me, it's been just learning to regulate myself so that I can then be in a safe space in my own body to be able to create that space for someone else. And just to add, like, I've got these two dogs, and I've noticed that when I am in a safe space, like when I am regulated, they are also less reactive. And I think so, like, that's the easiest way to see it happening. And that's also happening with the kids. And last thing is, we go to schools and NGOs to do workshops for kids. The teachers and the social workers who work there, because we're external resources, but the people who work there, they're always telling the kids to be quiet and don't make such a noise. And, this is bad. It looks bad. Our reputation is, everything. But we know that it's important for the kids to have fun. And we know that's an integral part of learning. So we incorporate activities into everything. And I think that's like, and of course, I know that is difficult for a teacher to do, because they have this much time and that much to teach. And, this much of themselves in those many classes. So I understand that it's difficult, and I think that's where we need to make a change, like move towards more inclusivity, just moving a little away from capitalism and patriarchy to more understanding of who we are as people, and also just recognizing our inner wisdom. I think I've covered as much as I want to do.
Absolutely. And while we have to wrap up with a lot of thoughts coming racing in, that how a child actually, from 4 to 6 months onwards, a child is actually able to pick up what the mother is feeling. And not just then, when the child is in the womb itself, the infant is able to feel what the parent is going through, and how that adds to the child's being. And so we all are so connected. And thinking how art, how just being. And maybe as adults we have learned it, we have also have this mindset that everything has to make sense. It's very transactional in some nature. And I was reading something. There's a book, very good book called The Artist's Way, that I'm currently reading. In that, they write that intellect is also a way of soothing. Maybe we all have learned how to soothe ourselves through the intellectualization of things. Maybe going to the art, going for just being at one place and talking to each other, and not for it to not make sense, might be anxiety provoking in itself, which we might have to work through. But kids are really good at. And while so summarize karte hue, I will say, I think it is with the right intention we can heal a lot. And we believe, like at Protsahan, that healing is possible, not curing but healing. कि हम कुछ चीज़ें चेंज कर सकते हैं, हम हील कर सकते हैं, बस उन्हें ठीक नहीं करना. We don't have to fix someone, we have to heal. And not just others, ourselves, because as you said, Surabhi, that healed people heal. If we are regulated, we regulate. So perhaps it was a very Thank you, everyone. It was a very important conversation. I feel so positive, and so, while positive and negative both are emotions which we need, not to discriminate. It is that the energy that I feel energized after talking, and this is the kind of people we need. We feel energized after talking. Thank you, and we best of luck for your healing journeys for others and yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.